which hopefully will help you to grow that award-winning sunflower. It's a tricky thing to do in our Scottish climate. Obviously, you know, there's times when we've got such a short period of growing. It does take a bit of time to grow that sunflower, and we've got a short period of time to do so. But hopefully, my aim today is really just to give you some hints and tips as to how to achieve that maximum result. So, just going into the presentation, I just want to kind of highlight the fact that, you know, Scottish climate it can be problematic, and we have to work within the parameters of what we have within. We're in northern latitude, and obviously we've got the Gulf Stream influence as well, which means in terms of growing, it means that we have cool summers, low sunlight intensity, plenty of rainfall, which has its benefits and its downsides, and lots of wind as well. So the key to growing a prize-winning sunflower is really to try and manipulate those conditions as best possible, so that you're providing shelter for the perfect bloom to grow, and also that you're preparing the soil well before you start planting out your sunflower. Planting out at the right time is obviously crucial as well in terms of protecting young plants and making sure that they're not going to be susceptible to frost. That's always April, this time of year, it's such a difficult time to plant because we've got extremes from some hot weather, then we've got the frost at night time. So we've really got to be on our toes as gardeners over the spring months. But I suppose when it comes to growing sunflowers, the most important thing is that we have plenty of sun, hence the name, plenty of light, and obviously heat's very important as well. So just some facts. I thought that I did a quick check to see, you know, what some botanical facts about sunflowers. And probably a lot of you will know these facts, but I found them quite fascinating. Helianthus is the botanical name for a sunflower. And if you break that into two sections, helia means sun and anthus means flower, hence the reason why it's called a sunflower. And another interesting fact is that the French word for sunflower is tournesol. I don't know if I pronounced that properly, but I gave it my best shot. But which means turns to the sun. It literally turns to the sun. And many of you, if you've grown sunflowers before, you'll have seen that happen. They're native to North America. You'll see vast planting of sunflowers if you do Google searches on anyone growing sunflowers in North America. It's ideal conditions there in terms of growing maximum sunflower crops, mostly grown for food rather than decorative purposes. The tallest ever grown, the Guinness World Records has recorded in 2014 a giant bloom of 30 feet. So that's what you guys have got, that's what you're up against. You've got to beat this 30-foot bloom and get yourself into the Guinness World Records. So during the day when the flowers are young and you've just planted out your young plants, you will find that they will follow the direction of the sun. This is called heliotropism as a technical name, but it's a lovely thing to watch. And if you work with children and young people, or maybe people that have learning disabilities, or anyone really can appreciate a flower turning its head to the sun. What you often find though is when the plant's fairly mature, it remains facing east. It won't turn its head as much. What happens is the stalk becomes quite rigid. When the plant is quite young, the stalk actually grows at varying degrees. You know, you'll find the left side grows quite quickly, hence the reason why it turns, and then the right side will turn at night time. So that's how it actually begins to turn in the sun. But when you've got a mature flower head, it remains facing east. To benefit us and also nature, sunflowers can produce up to 2,000 seeds, which is quite an incredible amount of seeds. Again, just a fantastic flower that obviously produces lovely things, you know, a lovely decorative flower to have in the garden, but also has a great additional factor in that you can eat the seeds. There's about 70 species of sunflowers, and they come in various colours, yellow, red and purple. I believe that the yellow varieties are the ones that actually benefit pollinating insects the best. They seem to like the yellow varieties better. So just looking at the life cycle of a sunflower, the optimum time to sow is really late April and early May. And it's quite crucial if you're growing sort of prize blooms to get this kind of sequence in a good order. So I would actually advise you to start sowing round about now. The plant can then be planted out late May when there's risk of frost has gone. You want to try and get your seedlings in optimum position, optimum growth for that planting out period. And again, you need to wait until the risk of frost is gone. There's obviously, things that you can do to protect young plants, and I'll talk a wee bit more about that. But you want to get your seedlings ready, for that kind of planting period. Normally the flowers will start to begin to emerge around about June to September. And it normally takes about 11 to 18 weeks for flowers to grow from seed into flowers. So roughly about that 4-month period is normally about the right time. And again, if you wanted to harvest your flower heads, you would do that round about October time. Many people leave them on the stalks, and there's a number of reasons why that's beneficial. And I can talk a wee bit about that later on. So I've just included in this slide the 3 categories that Enid set for the competition. You don't have to decide, what particular category you want to enter into. It may well be that you just wait and see what happens and see if you're actually going to grow a tall one, or if you've managed to create a fantastic flowered head. I don't think there's any restrictions really in how many times you can enter. So the 3 categories are the tallest sunflower, the largest flower head, and the most creative photograph. And the closing date is obviously the 31st of October. I would recommend that you keep an eye round about the end of round about when the flowers have started to emerge, that you want to take your photographs at the optimum height and size. So you probably would want to start taking photographs as soon as your blooms become quite established. And you would probably do that over a period of time so that you make sure that you get the largest, the tallest sunflower, or you actually take a photograph of when the flower's at its optimum. So you might have to take a few photographs along the way. So I've just kind of taken the word sunflowers, and I thought what I would do would try in every letter of the word sunflower. I thought I would come up with something that was integral to you growing a prize bloom. So my first letter is S, and I think S is for seed sowing. Without sowing seeds, we won't have sunflowers. And as I mentioned earlier, the best time to sow your seeds is around about April, late April, early May. You might want to consider thinking about succession sowing, which means that, you would be sowing some seeds, 1 week, and you might decide to sow another few the following week, maybe for a period of about 2 or 3 weeks, so that if you have a crop failure, say mice get into your glass house and you have a complete disaster with the first crop, that you've got a succession of plants there. I wouldn't put all my eggs in one basket. I would make sure I had lots of seedlings so that if I had any failures, there was another substitute there that was going to take its place. The germination time for sunflower seed is really quite fast, roughly between 14 and 21 days. So again, it's quite crucial that you get the timing of the seed sowing, looking after that young plant, preparing it, getting it strong and healthy to be sown outdoors, and actually timing that to a time frame where you can actually sow outdoors. You certainly don't want to have a lot of seedlings in your glass house that are becoming leggy or they're becoming pot bound and you can't move them on in time. So you really need to plan, that whole program of commitment to getting your bloom outside. It takes a lot of thought, and I think as long as you've got lots of kind of backup plants and you're trying out maybe different options of growing and sowing, that all works out really well. Here at the Caley, we like to make sure that we're recycling, and we really are promoting sustainable gardening. So again, you might want to consider different containers rather than using plastics. Again, if you've got plastics, it's okay to use for pots, but and obviously you're recycling those. But again, there's lots of other things you could be thinking about, you know, cardboard tubes. You could be sowing sunflowers in toilet roll cardboard tubes. You could be looking at, you know, these food containers again. You know, there's different ways of recycling. It's always fun to do, and it's very environmentally friendly. I would also suggest that your compost is peat-free. Again, just looking at our sustaining our planet and making sure we're not depleting our important peat beds. I would go for a peat-free compost. So early sowing indoors, I've just kind of, many of you will know the rudiments of how to sow indoors, but I'll quickly go through it. You want to sow indoors. I think indoor sowing is probably the best way of achieving a prize bloom. Some people may choose to sow directly outdoors, but again, you're relying on frost not being around. You're going to be sowing outdoors later in the season, which means, again, within a very short period of growing, you're really up against it to try and achieve that prize bloom. So my recommendation would be to sow indoors. And again, pots of seeds, sunflower seeds are fairly big in size. If I were sowing seeds in a commercial garden, I would probably sow them in a 9 centimetre square pot using a seed compost or a pot-free compost, a peat-free compost rather. Seeds compost, you know, again, all of our seeds have got their own food source within the seed. We don't really need nutrients in the soil. So you might want to consider a seed sowing compost, or if you don't want to go to the bother of that, you can just use your peat-free compost. That's fine to use as well. You might want to add things in there, things like perlite, which improves the structure of the soil and also holds a bit of water so that your seedlings will never dry out. Because they're quite robust seeds, they're not particularly difficult to germinate. I don't think you need to be too fussy about the seed mix, but many of us have our own regime in terms of sowing seeds, so don't change that if you've got your own regime. I would probably sow 2 seeds in a pot, just in case you have a failure, and I would make sure that they're quite well spaced apart, not too close to the edge of the pot, but certainly quite a distance from each other. And again, maybe about 1.5 centimetres deep, roughly, you know, the thickness of a seed at your planting depth is roughly about twice the depth of the size of the seed. So not too deep, but certainly not on the surface either. One of the most important things about seed sowing is really that contact that the seed has with the compost. It has to make good contact in order for it to start to germinate. And again, you might want to use something like a board just to kind of make sure it's got that contact to the compost. And you're obviously putting compost or a vermiculite surface layer on top of the seed. Again, you know, it's quite a robust seed, so you don't have to be too pernickety about the watering, but don't overwater seedlings. It's quite crucial that you don't do that. Generally with seedlings, or seeds rather, I would look at a fine rose watering can, something that gives a really fine spray. That's a good rule of thumb for seed sowing. Some people also submerge plants. Once they've sown their seeds in a pot, they'll submerge it in a tray of water and let that capillary action take up the moisture, so that the actual, if you leave it in a tray of water for maybe about 10 minutes, and if you then touch the surface of the soil in that pot, you'll find that it's very moist. And again, that's quite a nice way to water as well. The smaller the seed, if you're watering at the top, you know, sometimes these seeds can be dispersed in the top of the layer. So, but sunflower seeds are they're pretty robust, so you shouldn't go wrong. After you've done that, it's really important that you place it somewhere light and warm. If you're lucky enough to have a greenhouse, that's where your seed will go. If you want to make your seedling grow that little, or your seed grow that little bit faster, you may have a propagator, which is almost like a mini greenhouse with a heat source under it, or you might have a heated mat on one of your workbenches in the greenhouse. These types of additional heat will really bring on your seedlings quite quickly. The rule, what I would say if you are going to be using some kind of extra form of heat, is once you see that seedling begin to develop, take it out. You don't want it to get too lazy and weak. you know, it's interesting, we have to nurture little seedlings, but, you know, at the same time, if we fuss over them too much, they become quite weak. So if I see seeds beginning to grow in a propagator, I would get it out fairly soon. I don't let it get used to too much heat, because remember, it's got to get outside and brave that big bad world at some point. If you don't have a greenhouse or a propagator, there's other ways that you can keep your seedling, your seeds germinating on a windowsill is one way of doing it. You'll often see gardeners use a plastic bag over a pot. You can just attach that with an elastic band, and that's you creating your own little mini glass house. And if you put that on a windowsill, that will do perfectly well. An easy way of, almost like manufacturing that greenhouse effect. And the seedling should appear within 14 to 21 days. So once you've got that initial seedling in the pot, and it's obviously maybe not time to get it out, and it's probably too small to be going outside anyway, what I would suggest you do is then pot on, and that's really just putting your small seedling into a bigger pot to give it a bigger environment to grow in. Again, I would probably wait until your true leaves appear. You know, every seedling has what's called cotyledon leaves. These are the seed leaves, and you never get the true leaves until there's the third and the fourth leaves are the true leaves of a plant. So wait until it becomes, you know, probably a fair size, and these additional true leaves have started to emerge. And you certainly don't want your plant to be becoming leggy or growing too tall. Don't leave it too late, but certainly potting on is a good method of getting your plant well established before you plant it out. You'll probably be aware of how to pot on using a dibber, a pencil, or a fork. The main trick is really to not disturb the root system too much in the young plant. And obviously preparing, probably a 2-litre pot size is quite a good size to pot on into. And gently, you know, place it in. You've created your hole in the middle, and gently place in, not touching the stalk at all. You just want to touch those true leaves. That's all you're holding on to. And again, just make sure it's nice and, you know, secure in that pot. Plant to the same depth if you're potting on. Don't plant it too high or too deep. It will want to, that little seedling will want to grow at the same depth. And if you've decided to sow 2 seeds in a pot, at this point you have that choice whether you decide to pot on 2 strong seedlings, or if you find that there's only one that's actually quite strong, you would maybe just pot on the one. Water well. And if your seedling is of a decent size, you might want to start thinking about staking your young plant in a 2-litre pot at some point in its life cycle in that 2-litre pot. So on to U is for under glass. And again, you know, you're probably at the point where you've potted on your young plants, and you're just trying to acclimatise them outdoors and before they're ready for their final planting position. And you're preparing the plant for the world and being out in the garden. And this is called hardening off, and you can do that in a cold frame. If you don't have a cold frame, once your plants are quite well established and you're just about ready to start planting out, I would suggest just putting the plants out for maybe, on a good day, maybe a couple of hours, so that they begin to acclimatise, but always take them in, especially when there's risk of frost. So you're just adding, you know, making sure that they're beginning to acclimatise over a period of time. That's really important. And again, you know, it's just you just have to kind of gauge that as a gardener. But cold frames are really useful pieces of kit. And again, just helping to acclimatise the plant before you're completely ready to plant out. So nutrients, sunflowers are very heavy feeders. So as gardeners, we need to prepare the ground really well. You might want to consider adding an organic manure compost to the area that you're going to be growing in. Or you might want to put in a slow release fertiliser, which is going to feed the plant over a period of time during its growing cycle. And obviously, once the plant is in the ground, you might want to start thinking about I would recommend an organic liquid feed, something like a seaweed fertiliser is quite a useful way of promoting the flower and the growth. Or maybe you want to make your own. You might want to think about a comfrey tea. That's a really nice, rich fertiliser, organic fertiliser to use. And if you're lucky enough to have a lovely big crop of comfrey in your garden or allotment, it puts it to good use. You just have to get used to the smell, but I think we get used to that as gardeners. It's worth it to have our prize blooms to put up with the smell of comfrey tea, I think. And again, some people use a foliar feed, which is for young plants. That's a spray. And it can be something like a diluted comfrey tea or a nettle tea or a seaweed tea. And again, some people use that just to stimulate growth in smaller plants. You might have your own system, and again, trying to promote organic ways and, you know, not using too many chemicals when we're doing this. Many of you have heard before about what NPK is. NPK is nitrogen, phosphorus and potash. These are the key components of a fertiliser. Nitrogen is good for plant growth. Phosphorus is very good for root growth, and potash is good for fruit and flowers. Some people get quite technical when they're growing vegetables as to the kind of balance. This will all be a percentage within a mix in something like a tomato fertiliser or a seaweed fertiliser. And it really depends on what you're growing, you know, for certain the times that, you know, it's definitely crucial to make sure that you're applying a fertiliser at the correct time as well. But to grow a sunflower, I would probably recommend just a general fertiliser. Something like that seaweed fertiliser might be a good one, or a tomato fertiliser. All plants need some trace elements. You can see here listed are the trace elements that you find in a lot of these fertilisers, and a small percentage also helps to stimulate growth for any plant. Again, really crucial that you are going to feed at the correct time. Don't be tempted. That's quite a common mistake for people to overdose on the fertiliser, thinking that the plants are going to grow bigger and, you know, stronger. It's the opposite, really. It just actually can make a plant very weak. And again, try and go for an organic fertiliser. That's a preferable method. And if you can make your own, so much the better. So F is for fantastic flower heads. And that's one of our major categories in our sunflower competition. The seeds that Enid has sent out to you are the giant varieties, and these will promote the biggest flower heads. So you want to look for a giant variety, and if you're really wanting to grow a maximum flower head size. When you come to actually planting out, the distance is quite crucial if you want to grow sort of fairly tall and quite substantial flower heads. It's like any type of planting. The closer a plant is to another plant, the less it will grow. So again, if you want to distance them a little bit, that's a good idea. And that should maximise the height and the size of the flower head. And obviously when it comes to sunflowers, sunshine and heat are really, really key. L is for light and leggy growth. Many of you will probably be aware that you've maybe seen seedlings in a glass house where there's not enough light, or, you know, and you'll see this illustration on the right. There's a leggy seedling where the actual stem of the seedling is really, really too tall. There's a healthy seedling on the right there. And again, when a plant begins to do that, it's searching for light. It's really trying its utmost best to try and find some light. And that's why it produces this really leggy, tall stem. And that really actually makes the plant very weak. And once that actually happens, plants don't really recover after, you know, it becomes a leggy plant. It becomes quite a sick plant. So you really want to avoid producing plants that are leggy. And the key to that is making sure that you've got plenty of light for your seedlings. That's the key to that. So make sure plenty of light there. O is for overwatering. Doesn't come into, it's not an issue once you've got your plants outside, but certainly when you're at the seedling stage, you don't want to overwater your seedlings. You do want to keep an eye on them when they're in the glass house, or if you've got them on your windowsill or whatever. You do want to keep an eye on them. But certainly if you overwater seedlings, you'll get something called powdery mildew. The plants are just, you know, they don't produce strong plants. Can you excuse me for just 2 minutes or something at the door? That's great, thank you. Sorry about that, someone was shutting the door there. So yeah, don't overwater the seedlings, that's quite key. And make sure that when you are planting out your seedling or your sunflowers, that you're going to have to water them. They're very, very heavy feeders, so they want a lot of water. So make sure the final growing area is close to a water supply. You don't want your sunflowers to be in an area of the garden where it's, you know, the water supply, the hose or the water butt or the tap is really far away. You want to make sure that it's accessible so that you can get those the actual sunflowers watered on a fairly regular basis. So that's quite key as well. Just planning ahead your eventual site for the sunflowers. Make sure there's a good water supply close by because you will need it. So W is for where to grow. Again, sunflowers need plenty of sun. Ideally 6 or 8 hours per day is what the experts say. You want to choose a well-drained soil and a sheltered location. Make sure it's maybe out of a major sort of wind tunnel. And remember, as I mentioned earlier, that sunflowers are heavy feeders. They need lots of nutrients and watering. So when it comes to preparing the site, and this is something that you've probably started thinking about already, and if you haven't, you might want to start thinking about warming up the soil a little bit before you plant out your sunflowers. And again, many of us as gardeners will do that in a variety of ways. An old carpet, some cardboard. These artificial ways of warming up the soil is really a good thing to do. It also helps to suppress the weeds as well. You don't want weeds around where you're going to be planting out your sunflowers because they might be in competition with your prize blooms. So I would recommend an old carpet or some cardboard in order to make sure that your ground's nice and warm. So really, when you're ready to plant out, the risk of frost is gone. You will probably want to plant to a depth of about 2 or 3 feet square. And then to a depth, you maybe want to plant your sunflower to a depth of about 2 feet. It really depends on how big your plant is. If your plant has become quite established in that 2-litre pot, plant again to the same depth of soil. It's the same as when you were sowing your seeds into and potting on. Don't plant them too high, don't plant them too low. Do exactly the same when you're planting out in your final planting area. And before you plant out, you might want to work in an organic slow release fertiliser, maybe a bucket of your own homemade garden compost, your leaf compost, or some granular seaweed fertiliser. Again, don't make it too strong, but certainly a really nice environment for those roots to get established in is quite key. Sunflowers produce quite a strong taproot, and if you've grown sunflowers before, you'll see how kind of like the root systems are really, really robust. So if you've created a nice environment for those roots to get established in, that will also help in development of your flowers. And again, if you are thinking about growing your sunflower in a container, it probably will be smaller. It just doesn't have the same space to grow in, so it probably will be smaller. But that's not to say that you might not win in a category. You might have the most creative sunflower, or it might be the tallest, you don't know. But certainly, I wouldn't let that put me off if I didn't have a growing space. Growing in a container is always possible, but again, just be mindful that it might be smaller in size. So E is for enemies. I shouldn't really say that because there's no such enemies really in a garden, but slugs and snails are not our favourite friends in the garden. So slugs and snails are generally, they do tend to attack lovely fleshy new green growth. And again, sunflowers, like many plants, are susceptible to slugs and snails. And again, if you've gone through the process and you've actually taken a lot of time and care and you've nurtured your plants, they should be healthy plants. And a healthy plant is less susceptible to pests. So if you're putting in a strong plant into that ground, the chances are that, you know, it'll be less susceptible to slugs and snails. And again, you'll find that when you're putting out green, fleshy growth, slugs and snails are very attracted to it. But like most plants, once plants become established, they're less susceptible to slugs and snails. So again, if you're planting out and you just want to kind of like, you know, get your plants out, get them established as soon as you can, and you're a wee bit mindful about slugs and snails in the ground, you can always use that lovely trick of like a plastic bottle. If you take off the bottom and take off the top, and you're creating just a little plastic collar, and if you sink that into the ground and you've got your plant, your sunflower in between it, that acts as a barrier for slugs and snails. And there's lots of barriers for slugs and snails. And you may have your own preferred one. Eggshells is another one. They don't tend to like surfaces that are quite kind of jaggy. So anything that's jaggy is something that they don't want to step over. They are, I mean, beer traps is another one. It's good to put beer traps out for slugs or snails. Having a pond, I've just moved, I'm moving to a new garden soon with a pond. Luckily, I've never had a pond before. And I looked at the garden the other day and I cannot find a slug nor snail in the garden because I've got frogs and toads. So very fortunate. So again, just protect those young plants. You've gone to all that bother of establishing a really healthy young plant. Once you get it out there, make sure you protect it for the first few weeks at least. And again, if you are going to do that, think about an organic control method. I wouldn't advise slug pellets. It doesn't help our ecosystems and it's not good for our gardens. I would go for something that was more organic. So steer clear of nasty chemicals. And again, you know, if you are trying to deter slugs and snails in the garden, E is also for encouraging the good guys. These are our friends that are things like ladybirds and lacewings and hoverflies, particularly ferocious and eating aphids and black flies, which tend to really suck sap from nice young green fleshy plants. So attracting ladybirds and all these beneficial insects into our garden is key. And again, putting in bug hotels, that type of thing is really, really quite crucial. And as I mentioned earlier, encouraging birds and hedgehogs, great lovers of slugs and snails, they will certainly hoover them up. And as I mentioned, frogs and toads are natural slug and snail predators too. So just thinking about, you know, the whole connection of nature and thinking about, you know, that bigger picture of, you know, we don't need to really use chemicals. We can attract nature into our garden and it will do the work for us instead of having to apply lots of chemicals. So R is to remember to stake. Sunflowers, by their very nature, are very tall plants. So all the way through their growth, you will be needing to keep an eye on that stem. You don't want it to distort in any way. You want it to grow nice and straight with a bit of support. And again, if you are planting your plant out, and I mentioned earlier, try and find a spot that's not in a wind pocket. You want to make sure that, you know, that if there is wind around the garden, and there will be to a certain degree wind in some shape or form, a stake will certainly help to protect the plant. Be mindful though, if you're growing a giant sunflower, that you'll have to have quite a sturdy stake. Some people maybe start off with a cane and then they maybe progress to something that's more of a kind of like a solid pole. You need to make sure that, you know, if there was a gust of wind, that it wouldn't blow over and damage your plant. So a stake really has to support the plant, and it may be that you have a few different methods of staking through the development and the growth of the plant. And the other thing that's really important when you're putting a stake in to the ground, that you don't damage the taproots of the plant. Try and make sure that, you know, you're not disturbing the roots in any way. Quite tricky at times, but just be mindful of that too. And I would certainly encourage using soft, flexible ties when you're staking a plant. You often find that, you know, people have used a very tight or a wire tie that it can actually cut into your plant. And it might not do that initially, but again, if there's a gust of wind or a night where it's been, you know, the weather's not been that great, I would make it could cause the stalk to snap. So I would go for a soft, flexible tie and give it plenty of space. You know, don't tie it too tightly. A plant will need some flexibility. Remember, those roots are really strong in the ground, so it can move about slightly. Don't tie it too tight. And also keep an eye on how, as your plant begins to grow, that you'll probably have to tie in on a regular basis as the plant develops. And as I mentioned earlier, you might want to put some stakes in the plants when you're potting them up initially, once they start to grow. So if you've done all of these things, you've reached the end of sunflowers, and S is for success. And again, just when to photograph your prize-winning bloom. Once the flowers emerge, it won't grow any taller, so that's a good indicator that it's probably about time to start looking at, you know, taking photographs. And again, you might want to wait till then before you decide what category you're going to enter into, whether it's the tallest, the most creative, the biggest flower head. It's really up to you. And remember, it's not only your success that you're sharing in this competition. Bees, hoverflies, birds, and other wildlife will benefit from your efforts as well. You've produced a lovely flower that is good for us, but also nature as well. When it comes to the creative category, I'm not going to talk too much about this, but you can do that. Don't be put off by feeling as though you need lots of kit, an expensive camera. Phones are great. You know, I use a phone all the time, and I'm just totally amazed at the results that I get at times. I actually bought a little lens to attach. So I've got an iPhone, and I bought this little lens for £10, and you can do macro or micro photographs, and you just clip it onto your phone, and you can get some really, really good results from that. And again, when it comes to photographing your creative entry, think about the time of day. You know, it might be that you want to photograph early morning or evening. What generally happens over the summer is that the sun is in the sky optimum during the day, and that can actually kind of dilute colour. It can mean that, you know, the colour is less intense. So if I were maybe trying to take a good photograph, I would think about taking it, you know, either early morning or really later on in the day. And again, just getting that creative shot. It's all about angles and composition, you know, looking up, looking down, foregrounds, backgrounds, all of that. You know, the world's your oyster, really. And whether you want to include people in it, that's always, you know, maybe the people that have grown the prize bloom, or folk that have connected to that flower, and maybe the wildlife that you find on your sunflower as well. I think that's something that interests me quite a lot, just seeing, you know, butterflies and bees loving the nectar and the pollen in the flower head. And again, lovely to get these lovely shots. So after the competition, it doesn't end there. Once you've entered your prize photographs, I would suggest that you leave your flowers to turn to seeds in autumn and winter, and that will help the birds. The birds will come to your garden and they'll feed on these lovely sunflowers. You also might want to harvest them and think about seed sowing your sunflower seeds next year, or you might use them in another way. But certainly I tend to leave stalks out for the birds and enjoy them coming to the garden. You can also cut the stems. These are really helpful and useful in bug hotels because they've got a hollow stem. And if you had a bug hotel, you could put the stems in there, and you might find an overwintering insect decides to take up residence. And that's a benefit, obviously, for you for the following year. And again, the key thing is to keep on growing and developing your skills further. You know, you might want to think about, you know, growing more sunflowers next year, or if you're interested in the GLIN award that we're running in conjunction with CRT, you might want to think about, you know, participating in Grow and Learn in Nature, which is our award. And again, you know, that's a nice way where you can continue your growing and connection with nature. I'll just quickly touch on that. Grow and Learn in Nature is the award that I mentioned. And again, it comes with a nice resource that's got lots of information in relation to making your green space richer for you, but also for nature as well. And it helps you to connect with plants and nature. And again, you learn about certain things. You know, it's an outdoor. It's about making your outdoor space more nature friendly, and you would achieve a GLIN certificate if you were to think about working towards a GLIN award. It comes and there's a step-by-step guide as to achieve a GLIN award. The first thing that you think about doing is choosing your GLIN site. And this is a project in Glasgow that decided to use an allotment site. And they have transformed it from the left-hand photograph into the right-hand photograph. Underneath that big pile of plastic on the left-hand side was just a compost dumping area that nobody wanted to tackle, but through the GLIN award, this particular group decided to build a new compost area and grow some plants in there. And again, you can do a GLIN award in a variety of places. You decide on your GLIN project, something to make your garden more wildlife friendly. It could be planting up a rain garden, growing herbs on your balcony, planting up a bee and butterfly border, attracting insects that will benefit, you know, your growing space. This photograph that I've shown here, this is a photograph that I took with that little device that I mentioned earlier on my phone. It's just a clip-on macro lens, and it's a lovely bee on a chive early morning. So that's a level of detail you can get if you want to enter that creative category. And if you wanted to do GLIN, there's 4 outcomes there: biodiversity, nature, soil health, plant care, and propagating plants beneficial to nature. And these are some of the, I'm not going to go through this in too much detail, but if you were to think about a GLIN award, biodiversity and nature covers all of these aspects, and you really only have to achieve one of the list below in order to achieve that particular learning outcome. And again, if you were growing sunflowers, for example, you are providing food for pollinators and insects and birds and mammals. And the soil health as well, we mentioned during the sunflower presentation that we're really keen to promote healthy soil health and not using chemicals, thinking of environmental ways of mulches and fertilisers, and good soil, keeping the soil healthy through no-dig and green manure systems and good crop rotation. Plant care is another key outcome for the GLIN award. And again, just thinking about the rudiments of plant care, but also thinking about environmentally friendly ways of managing weeds, pests and diseases. And propagating plants beneficial to nature, we're probably all doing that already. And again, it's just looking into more detail as to how you maybe want to do that. And the GLIN award, you would record your progress. There's a portfolio where you would gather all your information and record it. And then you make a garden and nature pledge. And you might want to make a nature pledge after you've grown your giant sunflower as well. And that's just making that commitment to further growing or, you know, benefiting not only yourself, but nature too. At the end of that process, you achieve an award from the Caley, and we have representatives that will present individuals with their Grow and Learn in Nature award. So I think that's the end of my talk. I'll stop sharing my screen. Oops. Can't stop sharing my screen. Oops. There we go. That's it. Stop sharing. Sorry about the interruption there, folks. That was a delivery man that was chapping my door. It's the downside of working from home, and I thought he was going to break down the door. So sorry. So, any questions? Have I covered what you were looking for? Is there anything that you want me to cover that I haven't covered enough? Has it given you a good starting point to be growing a giant sunflower or a prize bloom or a creative photograph? What are your thoughts?
I think it's comprehensive. all I've ever done up till now is just bung some seeds in the ground. And we did some at the garden last year, but it really was, oh quick, let's get some sunflower seeds in, and we just put, I mean, we got some, but we didn't put too much thought into it. So that was really useful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think, you know, the pressure's on when you're trying to enter a competition for a prize bloom, and what I was trying to show there was just the optimum way of doing it and how much preparation and planning. I mean, you think about some of these prize growers that are growing giant vegetables, and I mean, it's a lifetime commitment. They're growing this it's a labor of love, and they're doing it, you know, for 12 months of the year to show something for a weekend. It's, you know, it depends the level of complexity that you want to put into it. Don't be put off by overthinking it. And sometimes you're just lucky, you know, you just happen to sow a seed in the ground and it just produces the best bloom for you, or the best plant.
I noticed you said something about that they ultimately always turn to the east. Was that right?
Yeah.
Because I had been thinking I'd plant them along a west-facing wall, which would be hopeless because they would then they then turn into the wall.
It's a general kind of rule of thumb. I wouldn't let that put you off growing them in that site. If that site's really sheltered and perhaps you've grown sunflowers there before, it's a general rule of thumb that they would probably sort of like navigate to the east as an option. But any plant grown in any situation will try and find light as best it can, and if the light source is in a different direction, it will want to try and face that way. So it was just a general kind of rule of thumb. That's what tends to happen. They do stop turning. That was the kind of main point I was trying to make. And the turning it's in relation to the sun, but it's also that the way that the stalk actually grows, it kind of grows at a very uneven rate. So that kind of then begins to make the head turn in a certain way and then turn back. It's a complicated business.
Yeah, more to it than you think.
Yeah, but I mean, it's really, if you've got ways of, the most important thing is to sow with enthusiasm and sow and look after and nurture your seedlings. That's the most important thing. You don't want to overcomplicate it in any way. If that's not your style, don't do that. But certainly look after young seedlings, that's key. There's no point in doing all of the steps that I've suggested and then forgetting about them or neglecting them. That kind of continuous looking after them is quite important. Any other thoughts?
No, that was fabulous. That was really interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed that, Jean, because like Pamela, last year I just started them off in the house and then I put them into big pots in the garden. But I must say I never fed them.
Yeah.
But they turned out fabulous. But I'm not saying prize-winning sizes, but they turned out great. So I'll need to remember and feed them.
Well, again, it's just make sure that it's like any plant, don't overfeed it. The most important thing, I think, is trying to make sure that you're planting out in good ground. You know, if you can improve the soil, it's given that plant a head start. And then if it comes to the point where it's actually beginning to flower, a bit like the way we would like, you know, our fruit and our veg, you know, you would maybe think about feeding at that point, but certainly don't overfeed it. That's not going to do the plant any good. And again, we're all growing in different species as well, so in different soil types, and some people will just naturally have maybe a better growing area than others, and you don't do quite as much to improve your soil, or there's not enough what we can do in terms of improving the site, but certainly just keeping on top of that is key.
My granddaughter grew them last year, and it was from the same source that I had got mine from, and hers were better, and I kept saying, I don't know how yours are bigger than mine, and I thought it was because it was more a shaded area or a sheltered area, but hers was fabulous last year. Mine were good as well, but hers definitely different. But one of the sunflowers I was growing in the pot, I was fighting with the slugs. So now I know it's because I wasn't feeding them. But I was actually going, there's going to be no leaves left. And I just had the sunflower head at the top because they were going through every one of them. But somebody suggested, I can't remember who had said about if the slugs or that do get to them, to take the bottom leaves off. And I don't know if that works, but somebody had suggested that now, you know, to try that. But I constantly was fighting with these slugs. So there's going to be not a leaf left in this plant.
It tends to, I mean, certainly the bottom leaves, it's not a particular plant that has nice foliage. I mean, the bottom leaves do tend to kind of get a bit sad and kind of, and they begin to really kind of die back a bit. So again, you can just take those off and, you know, just make sure that, you know, you've got some leaves remaining at the top of the plant, but they become a wee bit unsightly. It's a bit like tomato plants at times, you know, again, you're just trying to, and if you're taking those off, you know, you're taking, it's less kind of like nutrients needed for the plant and the leaves there. But I think, you know, it's a joy to watch sunflowers grow, but certainly we're all up against it when it comes to slugs and snails. And
yes, I know.
Thanks
for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to seeing how your plants grow, and hopefully you enter some nice prize blooms and you win some good prizes. But I look forward to seeing how the photographs begin to develop, and there'll always be somebody that plants in a non-conventional way, and it's just a joy, and they achieve amazing results. And that's the beauty of growing, isn't it? That sometimes the unexpected happens, and that's what keeps us on our toes.
That's right. Pamela, you got off to quite a flying start, and then something happened. Want to tell that story?
Oh yeah, my first sowing, you know, very keen, a few weeks ago now, wasn't it? And I put them on, you know, in modules, and put them on the kitchen windowsill. They were coming through nicely, very quickly, very healthily, and then sort of went out into the garden one day, came back, and the dog had managed to jump up, get the whole lot off the windowsill, and had got them all in her bed, you know. So there was like soil and all the little seedlings, and she was fast asleep, surrounded by all the seedlings. So yeah, actually I managed to rescue 3 of them and repot them, and they were fine. So it shows actually that they'd been mauled by the dog.
Oh, be careful where you put your seedlings.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if you win a prize with one of these seedlings that have had the dog's intervention.
That's right.
Maybe it's toughened those ones up.
Post-traumatic stress sunflowers. Anyway, just on the sunflower photographic, the creative category, we've asked the Dunfermline Camera Club to be the judges for the best picture. So they've kindly agreed to take that on. But I am excited I'm hoping we get quite a variety of images, because we could do a lovely sunflower exhibition, couldn't we? And we'll see how that goes. But we really hope that people will take pictures along the journey as well, and any funny stories like Pamela's one with the dog, you know, just to capture them. And you know, because I think everybody's just about starting to feel that we're coming out at the end of COVID, and I think the whole sunflower competition is something really to lift people's spirits, and if we could share a funny story or two, all the better, to get us all smiling. Regarding the GLIN award, we've already got confirmed 3 communities that want to do it, and we're looking for 5, so that we can we'd like to monitor and evaluate the whole kind of GLIN award process for each of the communities, and use that evaluation as a way of making sure that we're you know, we're getting what we're offering with the award the best that it can be. So there are still some spaces left. If you want to take up the award, just drop me an email and let me know, and Jean and I can have a chat with you about that. So if there's nothing else, ladies, I think we'll call today, bring the meeting to a close. Thank you so much, Gina. I've learned loads, and I'm going to go and start looking for I'm sure I've got. Can I ask you something? Is comfrey the same as what's the other? There's another plant that looks similar to it. I've already forgotten the name of it. I don't know if it's the same plant. Does comfrey have another name? Borage. Is borage and comfrey the same thing?
Borage is different.
Yeah. There's a wild comfrey Enid which you'll find in lots of kind of wild areas, which a lot of people don't have in their allotments. It's quite invasive.
Right.
It's the kind of, I would go for the comfrey that you'll find in lots of allotment sites. I can give you the particular variety. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but be mindful not to use the comfrey that you'll see in a lot of wild places where it's quite invasive. Or you could gather it. You know, you could certainly gather that, and if you use it as a comfrey tea. But there's the purple variety of it, the more sort of like deeper purple is the one that you find in a lot of allotment sites, but certainly no, borage is completely different. Although I think you can make a tea from borage, Pamela. Have you heard that before?
I'm not sure. I like borage, but usually just for the flowers, for the bees. Yeah. It's so good for that. Mm-hmm. And I did have comfrey on my allotment in Edinburgh, but stupidly didn't bring I was going to order some seeds actually, Enid, if you want, I'll pass them on.
Yeah, that would be great.
We haven't got any up at the garden, so
yeah, I think it's a good idea, you know, or even nettles. I mean, you can make a nice tea from nettles as well.
I was going to say that I've got the nettles in the plot, and I use the nettles. And I've got nettles in the house. I've got a wee outside in the garden as well, so I tend to use that because they grow up every year. Yeah. You know, I dig ones out, but I keep a small amount there for my tea. Yeah, again, they're readily available, I feel.
That's true. Seem to remember when we grew the comfrey, it grows so quickly to quite a height actually, so you can get a lot of fertilizer out of it.
Yeah, I had it in a garden for a while, and what I think I got about I cut it back about 3 or 4 times, Pamela, during the course of a season, so you could actually harvest it 3 or 4 times, and it just regenerates so quickly. So you could actually, and again, you can use that, and it's really good for compost bins as well, because it's so high in nitrogen. I used to just shred the leaves and put that in a compost bin, but I used it as a tea as well. But a really important productive plant, and a great plant to have around, again, just because it's so prolific and it will regrow like 3 or 4 times in any growing season. You could be harvesting it and using it on a regular basis.
Well, I planted in the middle of a fruit garden. I know, because I got it as a plant and it was about this size, and I thought I'll just put it here in the middle of the fruit, the currants and everything, and of course it just completely overtook everything. But useful.
A good plant to have around.
That's good to know, because my neighbouring plot, the plot next to me, the chap, he just grows it and doesn't do a thing with it. So I'll be able to say to him, you can pull that and put it into, he'll maybe give me some, you never know. But he's grown it for the first time and it just took over, but he's not done a thing with it.
Yeah, they're enormous.
So I'll have a wee word with him.
Yeah, tell him to get, he could be selling it to other plot holders if he's harvesting it 3 or 4 times a year.
Yeah, I'll tell him that. That's fabulous. However.
Okay, anything else? No? Okay, so thanks again, Jean, for enlightening us into how to win our giant sunflowers. And we'll have another Ready, Set, Grow meeting probably in about another 6 weeks' time. And we'll see what we're going to, any ideas for any themes or anything, or any masterclasses you'd like to have, just let us know if we can organise it. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Hello, Enid.
We're here.
Oh God, I can't believe it.
Hang on a minute, I'm just going to stop recording. Hang on. Can figure out how to do that. Oh.